So we have Chelsea McGuire, who is Assistant Director of External Affairs for WIFA, the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. And so it's really nice that you could join us. I appreciate that introduction. Like she said, my name is Chelsea McGuire. I am the new Assistant Director of External Affairs at WIFA. A lot of you are familiar with WIFA, which means you know sort of the makeover that we've been going through over the last 6 months or so. Back in 2022, the Arizona legislature decided that WIFA was going to be sort of the hub of water security efforts in Arizona, specifically with about a $1.4 billion investment into WIFA to do some things we hadn't traditionally done. As was mentioned, we are the state's revolving fund facilitator and administrator. And so we're very used to making low cost, accessible loans to communities across Arizona for clean and drinking water systems and clean and drinking water projects. But the legislature said, you know what, we're going to bump that up and we're going to beef that up. And now WIFA is going to be sort of a one-stop shop for holistic water security access in Arizona. So today I want to talk about the first step that we're making, maybe not the first step, but the first open step that we're making down that path. And that's specific to our water conservation grant fund. So what is this fund? What is it supposed to do? Just like the name implies, it is very laser focused on water conservation projects. The idea was if Arizona was going to invest this huge $1 billion investment in augmentation and bringing new water into the state, we wanted to make sure that water was being put to the best use possible. We also wanted to make sure that we were sort of going after the low-hanging fruit, and that sometimes it's a lot cheaper to conserve water than it is to find a new water source and bring that in. So we really looked at this as sort of the way to bring this all full circle, holistic approach to we want to use water well and have more water to use in the future. So that's the goal of this fund. We want programs and projects that have long-term, permanent, sustainable reductions in water use. And we have $200 million available to do that. And I keep saying that number, so I think it's lost on me every once in a while just how much money that is. But we have $200 million to do these good water conservation programs and projects. There are some strings attached to that money because that is from COVID relief funding through the American Rescue Plan, which means a couple of things. One, it means that we have a very aggressive timeline for actually getting that money on the ground. We have to obligate that money by June of 2024, which is very fast approaching. And then the expenditure deadline under the grant is December of 2026. So it's a pretty quick timeline for projects, the kinds of projects that we're thinking. But that's, I think, part of the reason that we're looking at the structure of the grant that we have that I'll talk a little bit more about in terms of partnerships and stacking and that sort of thing. So how much can you actually get out of that $200 million? It's up to $3 million, $250,000 per project, $300 million per program. That's probably the most common question we have had is what is the difference between a project and a program? And the answer is, we don't know. We do sort of know. We don't have a statutory definition. We don't have a rulemaking definition. So what we have said is that a program is going to be over a length of time. It's going to have multiple deliverables, and you're probably going to be talking about multiple stakeholders as well. Versus a project, which I can kind of see as here is the thing that we are building. It's a one-stop and we're done. That's the one deliverable. It's our one timeline. I'm also calling it a very fact-intensive determination. So if I am writing an application for this grant, I'm going to make my best case to the grant committee as to why this is in fact a program and therefore should be eligible for the $3 million. Frankly, I think you can make that case in a whole lot of different ways. So I don't anticipate a whole lot of project applications. I think we're going to get a lot of program applications. And that's what we want to see. Because again, we have $200 million to get on the ground in a pretty quick timeline. And then who's actually eligible for this grant funding? The easiest way to say it is that it's government entities. So we're talking cities, towns, special districts, anything that's been created by the statutes of the state of Arizona are eligible to participate in this. NGOs are also eligible in partnership with one of those entities. The NGO can absolutely be the lead recipient on the grant. They can be the lead applicant. The money can go directly to the NGO. We just have to have that proof of partnership, whether that's an MOU or I am an NGO partnering with the city of Scottsdale, the city of Phoenix to do particular things through my NGO. I also have a quick disclaimer on that because we have a bill pending at the legislature right now, which is Senate Bill 1390, that would expand that eligibility. Long story short,
legislation gets drawn sometimes very late hours of the night during budget week. And that's sort of what happened with the Water Conservation Grant Fund. So the intention all along was that that fund would have a broader eligibility specifically to tribal entities and tribal communities. The way the language was written, that wasn't the case. And so we realized that a little too late to fix it, had to come back this legislative session to fix that. The way we're doing that is by aligning the eligibility for most of our new 3 funds by saying all water providers are eligible for the 3 funds, which means tribal entities, because they do fall under the definition of water provider, but then also private water systems, small private water companies, that kind of thing. The folks that WIFA are used to working with will all be eligible. So we're not limiting the eligibility, we're just trying to expand it. So what exactly are these projects that we have in mind? What is it that we're trying to fund while we're here? Again, this is one of those where the legislature did not want to be prescriptive. They did not want to limit the creativity and the innovation that these communities could come to us and say, this is something that we want to fund, but there had to be some guidance somewhere. And so a lot of times what we would hear was sort of an example of what those programs could look like. Rainwater harvesting was one we heard a lot. We want to be able to empower communities to go out and get homeowners or other sort of entities to adopt rainwater harvesting practices. Awesome. Turf removal is another one that we hear a lot. Maybe that could be on the city level. It could be on more of like an HOA level, right? Or neighborhood level. Turf removal is something that we've talked about. But we also, I think, are looking broader to that as well in terms of this could be agricultural entities. It could be agricultural projects, installing less water intensive drip irrigation, that sort of thing, green infrastructure generally. And I think there are a lot of ways where you can take projects that our green infrastructure projects that have multiple benefits, right? So it could be something more along the lines of shade, and it could be trees, but you have that water conservation benefit, and there's a way to show that. That's really the hook here. If you can show that what your project is doing has a tangible water conservation benefit, show us why you're eligible, and the committee will absolutely consider that application. So we are looking to be innovative. We're looking for creativity. We're looking for a whole lot to come through and things that maybe communities have wanted to do for a long time, but just couldn't find that resource in order to do it. I already talked a lot about who is eligible, so I don't really need to go over that too much more, but this is a good opportunity to talk about where we think those kind of partnerships are going to come into play. If you can find multiple entities, multiple cities could get together and say, we want to do this larger landscape scale kind of project. We want to make sure that we're leveraging as many resources as we can. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that there is a 25% matching requirement under the grant. So I think that's a lot where some of the NGOs may come into play, where they may have some either staff time resources, in-kind contributions that they can make to that match. In some cases, maybe even some monetary resources they can make to that match. But the ultimate beneficiary, will be somebody on the ground in one of those government entities. But creative, right? Think of who you might want to partner with and how you might want to get these benefits kind of across the ground a little bit faster. So what's the process going to look like for this? We're in the first steps of this right now with WIFA review. So we have an application period open right now, and we are taking applications as we receive them. Staff is going to do an overview for eligibility. Essentially, we'll take that statutory criteria, make sure the application matches that eligibility, and give the board or give the committee kind of an overview of what that project is, what the anticipated benefit of the project is, make it as easy and accessible for that committee as we can. The committee itself is completely separate from our WIFA board, which is kind of interesting, but the committee has been appointed by the board, and it is a mix of NGO representatives, NRCD representatives, small and large water systems, public and private water systems. There's a university representative from U of A on there as well. So it's a pretty broad cross-section of water users and folks with expertise in water conservation. So they're going to get all the applications, and they're going to get all of staff's notes on the applications, and then they're going to make recommendations about which should be funded to the broader WIFA board. The WIFA board itself is the one who actually votes yes or no to give the money out. And that board is made out of, easiest way to say it is financial and water experts. So folks who have a lot of experience in either one or both of those areas. And so can really take those recommendations and say, yes, we think this is the best use of money for the best water conservation or the most water conservation on the other end. All in all, this process will take no longer than 6 months per application, partially because we do, again, have that pretty compressed timeline, but we also want to make sure that we give our grantees enough time to actually get these projects on the ground too. So I think that will take a little bit of finesse on WIFA staff to say, okay, we're seeing this project. This clearly has a very aggressive timeline. We want to make sure we get that in front of the committee as soon as possible. There may be some others that, okay, we can wait until next month's committee meeting or something like that. So it may not be that the committee sees 80 applications every meeting, but every application will be seen by the committee within 6 months of its receipt. So that is the commitment we've made, and that's the policy that we've put into play. Current grant cycle is open. It opened on April 18th and it closes this Friday, May 19th. My disclaimer on that, though, is do not be intimidated by that deadline, because we will open the second grant cycle almost immediately after. So I anticipate it will be open, honestly, if not the next Monday, at least by the 1st of June. So the idea is that these will be rolling grant cycle, rolling applications. We'll continue to get them in. We'll continue to analyze them as we receive them. Again, a lot of money to get on the ground. And so we want to make sure that we have every opportunity to do that. So if you might be an entity and you're working on one of these and you're saying, man, Friday just is not attainable, that's okay. Wait until the next one. You're not going to be that much farther back in line. You're still going to have that opportunity to get in front of our committee. And with that, this is our landing page. This is a pretty ugly URL, and it's also in yellow, which means you can't see it. But if you go to azwifa.gov, on our menu at the top, there's a drop down for funding opportunities. Click on that, click on Water Conservation Grant Fund. We have all the information that you're going to need to know there. The notice of funding opportunity, an FAQ sheet, a one-pager, just kind of an overview, the webinar recording of the pre-application webinar that we did, where we answered some questions in real time. So hopefully anything you might be able to think of is answered by something on that site. But if it's not, just email me. My email is there on the screen as well. Would be absolutely happy to answer those questions as they come up and kind of help you walk through. I think that we're kind of used to grant programs where maybe they're a little bit more closed off, right? You don't necessarily have the access to the staff to ask those questions. That's not the approach we want to take with this one. We really want to be as open and as accessible to our potential applicants as possible. That's why I'm here trying to do kind of some road shows, making sure that people are aware of these opportunities, but we want to be here to help. So take advantage of it. Use my email freely as you need to.